Hey there, you're listening to Risk Required, the series and book all about the inside track to finance, the tips and tricks that could allow you to find financial freedom and retire from the 9 to 5, just like Ed Pitt-Ford did, aged just 32. I'm Gareth Barlow, and joining me is Ed, the man with the financial Midas touch, an investor, entrepreneur, and now author. The information and opinions in this podcast are provided for informational and educational purposes only and do not constitute financial advice. The presenter, production and publisher are not responsible or liable for any analysis made by the audience based on the information in this recording. No parties warrant or guarantee the accuracy or completeness of any information. Audiences should always do their own research or consult an independent financial advisor who will advise based on the individual's specific circumstances. So, we've got all the legalese out of the way. This is all about you, Ed Pitt-Ford, and I want to start by telling you some things you already know about yourself, but the audience doesn't. We're going to get on to finance, onto debt, onto money, onto politics as well, in due course. But let's just learn a little bit about the man we're going to hear from. So you have, I think it's fair to say, somewhat of a Midas touch when it comes to investments. You often invest into a company when it's little more than an idea itself. And over the last 6 years, you've averaged over 40% year on year across your portfolio, an impressive amount to say the least. Educated in the private system, you went on to boarding school at the age of 7, latterly attending Sherman School in Dorset. And with regards to education, you weren't just content with one degree, were you? You have two, one in physics from Imperial College and an MBA from London Business School, for which you also secured a scholarship. With regards to your career, you started from a depressing office job in Hertfordshire before moving on to stacking supermarket shelves at Christmas, then managing a team of 60 in Bangalore, and also negotiating not just one but multiple construction contracts on the side of the road in Italy. And with regards to your entrepreneurial journey, it was small, humble beginnings, it's fair to say. You, at the age of 11, were selling cream teas at home in Dorset, but very quickly progressed to co-founding Truck Labs back in 2009. That was with a university friend, a company that recently sold for an undisclosed amount in the United States, but we do know that secured over $30 million of funding over the past decade. And throughout all of this time, you've been investing with increasing boldness, and perhaps ultimately, the greatest sign of your confidence in your own ability was investing into Octopus Energy. And to do that, you remortgaged your flat. And that ultimately proved a life-changing gamble. And we'll get on to that in due course. All of that considered, it's little surprise that you were able to quit your job back in 2019 and pursue a life as a private investor and also begin a career in politics too. And while that political journey is young, it's still impressive. You were elected to Westminster City Council in 2022. Within 18 months, you've secured and succeeded in switching the £1.8 billion pension fund for Westminster City Council to Paris-aligned funds. You've allocated a further £90 million to renewable energy projects. You also sit on the Planning Committee, the Environment and Highway Scrutiny Committee, and also a deputy whip for the Minority Party. It's not a bad list, is it?
Yeah, when you say it like that, it sounds pretty good.
Understatement of certainly the day, if not for longer. It strikes me that you have had a glittering career and you're only in your mid-30s, late 30s, some might argue.
Let's go with mid.
Mid-30s. Yeah. Why? Why has it been so successful? We'll get on to the various parts in a moment, but if you were to think about you as an individual, what has been the key to that success? Has it been environment that you grew up in? Has it been you as an individual? Has it been a bit of both?
That's an interesting one. I think there's a couple of things at play there. My parents worked very hard, almost to the detriment of my upbringing. I remember being on holiday and my dad was there working away. We could be anywhere anywhere in the world, like Italy or France, and he would be there working, even writing the dictionary on holiday instead of just relaxing and enjoying himself. And then whenever they'd say goodbye to us, it was always work hard. It was never have fun or enjoy yourself. It was work hard. And so I guess that kind of gets ingrained into you. And then there's the kind of slightly more sobering side of it is kind of growing up gay in a world that didn't accept that. At the time I was growing up, teachers weren't allowed to teach me about being gay and that was okay and natural and normal. My parents weren't showing that it was okay either. The press certainly wasn't, the government wasn't. So I guess knowing that I was gay inside, I knew that I kind of had to look after myself and make sure that there was a good fallback cushion there in case I had to survive on my own. So that probably caused a lot of drive right from the beginning. So yeah, I guess I've been pushing myself, perhaps to the detriment of having fun, but it's landed me in a reasonably good place right now.
If you were the child of Warren Buffett, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, you could understand as well where that kind of entrepreneurial spirit started from as well. With regards to mum and dad, what were they doing when you were a kid? Did you grow up in a family that was constantly doing business deals and hustling and trying to find money?
Yeah, no. So my parents were both NHS dentists. My dad refused to take private work. He didn't, as he said, didn't believe in treating people who didn't need treating. And I know that private dentists do treat people who do need treating. But he was very much, a public servant in the way he approached his work. There was no business deals. There was very much a work ethic. So he was working hard at that. He bought a house that needed doing up. So any time that he wasn't working on his academic work, he would be working on rewiring the house and plumbing, and we'd have to get involved in that. So we were not allowed to just sit on the sofa in the holidays. We'd have to help him with the plumbing and so on, which has actually been very useful.
And you say we, it's not just you.
Yeah, so me, my brother and my sister. My brother is 2 years older than me. He's a banker. And my sister, 5 years older than me, and she's a doctor. So people ask why we didn't go into dentistry, and there was just too much chat at the dinner table about dentistry that I think all of us were quite bored of it by the time we got to working out what we wanted to do with our careers.
So you grew up in a relatively rural part of the UK, and very quickly, it's fair to say, got separated from mum and dad. We said in that introduction you went to boarding school at the age of 7. What was that like, and what has that led to, do you think?
That was tough, and it's taken quite a long time to unpack that, and because I always used to be like, everyone else went through that, it can't have been that difficult, it wasn't that bad, all these things you'd say, and you kind of brainwashed into it, and you probably would send your children to a boarding school because that's what your parents went to and it's what you went to, and so you kind of naturally would pass that on. But having dug into it a bit more, it's like, so the first time you get left at the boarding school, it's like going through a breakup. You're kind of 7 and your parents leave you there, and it's kind of heartbreaking. You don't know what to expect because you're 7, and then when it happens, like it's like something's ripped out of you, and you're not allowed to contact them, and you're just kind of left to get on with it. And then 3 weeks later, you're allowed to go home for 1 or 2 nights, and then you have to go through it all again. And it's like going through a breakup 15 times a year as a 7-year-old, 8-year-old kid. And I just, personally wouldn't do that to my kids. I don't think it's a practice we should review. But yeah, when you get a bit older, more okay. I know kids are more wanting to get away at that point, but it kind of severs that connection you have with your parents, and it makes you very independent and very ambitious and driven and so on. There's lots of good qualities that come from it, but it's painful.
I was going to ask you, what do you think it then did for you in latter life? And I think you answer that, and it's testament to maybe who you are now. And maybe if you didn't go to or have that experience as a kid growing up, you might not have been as feisty in business and wanting to stand on your own 2 feet.
There's a lot of research that's been done around it, and you kind of see boarding school people thriving in institutions, and
but you left an institution. You left working.
Well, I think because I was gay, I had to question it. Whereas if I was straight, I'd have probably just carried on climbing institutions. I was signed up for the army at one point and kind of pulled out a month before I was meant to go to Sandhurst, which it would have been an interesting experience. So I questioned it, but it does make you very good at that. It makes you need to be needed, and it makes you incredibly independent. So I think I've kind of, because I've had to question everything, I've taken a slightly different path through the world, which has actually been really, really good for me. It's probably why I've taken the more risky, ambitious options when I've had pathways to choose between in my life.
You were at boarding school from a very young age, but you're also dabbling in business to some degree at a young age as well. We mentioned there cream teas, the age of 11?
Yeah. So I was sat in the back of the car one day, we were on the way to the swimming pool, and I kind of worked out that if I wanted a TV in my room, like lots of other kids at school had TVs in their rooms, and like I was told we couldn't afford it. And then I was kind of working out with my pocket money of 50p a week. There was just no way I was ever going to be able to afford it, however much I got to. And so I was going to have to earn my own money. And then, so a pretty basic reason to start trying to make money. But I looked around and I wasn't allowed to get a job because I was considered too young. Like there's Dickens rules in place.
Yeah,
to
there was
stop
no
children
there was no chimneys being swept at that point,
Yeah.
was there?
And then I thought I'd do a paper round. I'd watched all these American films where people do paper rounds and make a bit of money. But again, I was too young to do that. You had to be 13. So I kind of, having had cream teas when we'd gone to, visit Corfe Castle and stuff, because we like beautiful Dorset countryside, and seeing the markup they were making, I think, charging £1.20 for a pot of tea, and I was like, that's crazy because the tea bag doesn't cost that much. So I thought I'd do it. I'd take that profit. And so, painted built some wooden signs, painted them with Southwell cream teas, and put them up down the lane, put some tables outside. I baked the scones. I went to the local butcher and he gave me clotted cream at cost price. He was very impressed with my entrepreneurial endeavours. And then, so the first day, just sat there and waiting, and no one came, and that was quite sad. And when I went to take in my signs at the end of the day, I realised they'd been thrown into the hedge.
What?
So the next day, I not only tied them to the trees with string, which not the best security, but I tried. But I went and checked on them every couple of hours, and then some customers started coming, and there was nothing like that feeling of the first customer making kind of 10 weeks pocket money in one transaction and kind of profit, and it kind of gave me the buzz to keep going. And that was my first profitable company. So me and my brother working on it made 50 quid that summer holiday, so 25 quid each, and bought myself an electric train. Not quite enough for a TV, but I'd got the bug.
Perhaps the most controversial question, we'll get this as an aside, but perhaps the most controversial question of this entire series: cream first or jam first?
Cream first, yeah.
I subscribe to that.
My sister does it the other way around, which is odd considering we've grown up in the same family, but yeah, cream first. And scone, not scone. Just
I'm on board with all of this. I'm on board with all of this. If we were to take you back then, that was the age of 11. You got your train set. You and your brother got 50 quid. You got you £25 each. Did you have any idea at that age what you? And I hate the question. We all hated it when we were kids, of course. But what you wanted to do when you got older?
I can't remember thinking about it. It was 11. Before that, I wanted to be a teacher. I remember when I was kind of 5 or 6, I wanted to be a teacher.
And then as time progressed, as you got into your teens, what was the feeling?
I don't know. I was considering the forces. The forces get you quite young, so they always had liaison officers come to school and try and persuade you how great their division was. So, the army or the air force or the Marines. So yeah, I was all signed up for that. I did want to make money. There's no doubt about that. I guess I'd watched so many films on TV where people had a lot, and I know that I was growing up in a very privileged world, but compared to the other people I was at school with, I didn't have a lot. And so I was like, one day I'm going to make that, I'm going to have that. And also the prep school I went to was a big, beautiful country house in the middle of nowhere. And it kind of builds these expectations in you of what your future life might be. And so that's kind of something I wanted to hit. And it's kind of true. If you watch Home Alone, the house I live in is like completely out of reach of any normal person. Similarly, Mary Poppins, like all these things, they're just showing you a world that was completely out of reach, but you didn't realize it. So my expectations were there. And then a little bit of a harsh reality check as I started to grow up and realize what real life might be like.
So considering all of that, why then do physics at university?
That is not a very exciting answer. I didn't know what to do, and physics was something I was good at AES level or GCSE when you're choosing what you're going to do, and I quite enjoyed it. So I thought I'd do that, and then it didn't really close any doors. So I'd still be able to do what I want. It was a tough degree to put myself through, and then when I came to do the MBA later on, it was an absolute breeze because it was interesting, which helped, and it's real life. Whereas the physics. Some of the physics they taught me has since been proved to not be true. So it was no surprise that I could not get my head around it.
And at that kind of time, you are also moving beyond the small confines of cream teas when you're 11. And this is the period where perhaps your most successful venture when it comes to ROI, return on investment, came to fruition. We'll get on to it perhaps in episode 2 or 3, but this is when a university student studying physics and then doing a business master's starts thinking about trucks.
Yeah, I mean, I should mention before that there was a business I started at university that I do talk about in the book, but it was doing quite well, but then came into an issue and the company just disappeared overnight. So not every business I've started has been a beautiful success, but I guess part of the answer is just keep trying. But yeah, trucking, an odd industry. But I had a friend on the course with me, and he was doing 4 years, I was doing 3. So in his 4th year, they had to come up with ideas for businesses, etc. And he came up with this one, which so the large trucks in America, they have a huge gap between the cab and the trailer. Causes loads of drag, and that costs them loads of money and fuel, but they can't fill the gap because then they can't turn tight corners. So this thing deploys across the gap when they're at highway speed, covers that hole, and then it retracts again when they slow down so that they can turn corners again. Very simple idea. And part of the struggle we had when raising money was people said, well, why hasn't this been done before? And they didn't believe that it was a good idea if no one had done it before. Hopefully they're kicking themselves a little bit now, but so a very simple idea. And I helped the EU were running grant funding at that time, so I was like, suggested we do that and put in a bid, and we got 100,000 euros from the EU, and then hired some people, built some prototypes, and eventually moved the firm over to the US. But the returns on that were good. So I started by putting £3,000 into that in 2009, and then I sold half my stake in 2017 and made 55 times my money on that first investment. I did make investments further, like between that first one and 2017. There were moments where there wasn't enough money to pay the staff, so I'd invest another, whatever it was, 10, 20K to make payroll. So there were some hairy moments. Investments, I don't think venture capital firms would necessarily make. I guess to me, this was my baby. I'd put some money into it. I know you're meant to see that as sunk cost, but to me, there was still some value in it. But they can be a lot harsher. They can be like, well, it's lost. Cut your losses. That business is over. And so they might not have made that, but
we said it was an undisclosed amount it sold for, but it was ultimately worth that 10, 20 grand on occasions.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that also venture capital firms are looking at a 5 to 10 year time horizon for their investment. And if you look at that first investment went in 2009 and the business sold 2023. So 14 years, it's a long drag, which they, again, might not put up with necessarily. But yeah, ultimately worth saving their company, and also quite nice for the people who didn't lose their jobs. So.
The book is called RiskRequired. I'm interested to think, at what point in the last 36 years did you start learning that was a concept, a strategy to live by?
Oh, that's a tough one, because I think I kind of did it naturally.
There wasn't one lesson.
So not that I can think of. I think there's moments where you once you get that concept of inflation, that if you put your money in a bank account, it's effectively losing money in real terms, because inflation is normally higher than the interest you're going to get on a bank account. And so if inflation's at 4% and the interest on the bank account is at 2%, or inflation's at 2% and the interest on the bank account is 0.5%, which we had for a long time, and then recently inflation's been up at 10 and the interest has been kind of 4 or 5%, but all the time you're getting less money than inflation, therefore you're losing money in real terms if you just put your money in the bank. So there's no way you can even stand still without taking any risk. This whole idea of risk-free is kind of nonsensical. It just doesn't exist. So I guess it's probably at business school I started to get my head around that and realize that, when I was younger and I was putting stuff in 6-month term deposits and getting 5%, thinking I was doing great, I was still losing. So yeah, and then once you've got that concept, then you start to see some of the opportunities out there and what's what's possible.
We said in the introduction, and I'm just scrolling back through my notes because it's an incredible line about your career, because this is what follows naturally, isn't it? After university, you do physics, then you go and do your MBA, and then at some point someone's like, well, what are you going to do for a job? And he went from A depressing office job in Hertfordshire, I quote, to stacking supermarket shelves at Christmas, to then managing a team of 60 in Bangalore, India, to then negotiating construction contracts on the side of the road in Italy. Italy. This is a boy born and bred in Dorset who went to go and do physics, who then was like, hang on a second, maybe the business side's more interesting.
There was a gap, just to clarify. So I did physics, then you can't do an MBA without having done a few years work experience.
So what came first?
So it's physics and Tesco, then the MBA. And Tesco was the bit where I was doing that office job in Hertfordshire. I remember walking in on day one and thinking, I can't do this for the rest of my life. It's just a whole room of banks and banks of desks of people, and they're sat there all day. And I'm kind of like, when's break time? There is no break time. And then people are eating lunch at their desks, and it's just like the whole day sat at the desk, and I just couldn't get my head around that. Even at university, you'd get to go off and do some sport and do something other than work. So yeah, that was a depressing moment. And then I remember like going around every different team in the office, like sitting with them, trying to understand the role, and nothing really appealed to me. And then it wasn't until we had a presentation from the people doing the environmental stuff for Tesco that I was like, oh, actually, there's something interesting here, and went and had a few coffees and managed to move myself across to that department, which was a lot more interesting.
And then the MBA.
Which I kind of did more out of need than out of some grand plan. But I'd got a 2-2 in my physics at university, partially because it was very difficult, and partially because my father got ill at the end of first year, and kind of that progressively got worse over the next 2 years. So that didn't help. But I might have got a 2-2 anyway. I scraped in with the grades, and I don't know, 100 people or so didn't pass at all. So just to complete that course, you're doing well, and then a 2-2 is actually quite far off the bottom. So I'm okay with that. It's just the world's moved on where everyone expects a 2-1 now. But so when I was applying for jobs, I was doing quite well. I was chatting to someone at PwC. It was all going well. They liked me. They liked my experience. And then they found out I got a 2-2, and they just said, we can't take you. You have to stop talking. It was very much a cutthroat line on that. I managed to change Tesco's policy on that to accept a 2-2 from Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial and Warwick. The director helping me went to Warwick. It's something that I think companies should look broader generally at what people have. And Octopus was great for that, because they didn't even need a degree. They were willing to look at what other evidence you have from the rest of your life and experience. And I think that worked really well for them.
And that, under Octopus, led to both the construction contracts in Italy and the team of 60 in Bangalore?
So 60 in Bangalore was Tesco. Once I'd done that environmental stuff, I joined a team doing a change project for the property department. And part of that was a bit of a grim job, but outsourcing UK jobs to India. The business case was insane. You'd pay £100,000 a person in the UK and £6,000 a person in India.
Which is a local going rate was probably quite good.
Yeah, and it was a no-brainer. And all that was a communication job, really. I just had to explain what the team in India were doing and achieving, and suddenly I looked great, because it looked like they were doing loads, and all I was doing was improving the communication between the two sides.
And then Octopus, we said in the introduction, was kind of the big break and also pivotal moment in many respects.
Yeah, so that came about on the MBA, I was getting a little bit nervous actually. I've kind of quit my job, spent loads of money on these, because they're not cheap, these courses, even with a scholarship. And I didn't have a job lined up, and I kind of had a term left to go. I was even considering going back to Tesco at that point. But the whole goal had been to try and go into something where renewable was more core, so that it didn't get cut when budgets were starting to get cut. So I was on this, what they call a global business experience in New York, and it was one of the other people on my course said you should have a look into private equity with renewable energy, something I'd never heard of. I didn't know what it was. So when I looked it up, and it sounded great, and it's effectively taking money off private individuals or companies and creating private businesses that then go and invest that or build renewable energy power plants. So that sounded great. I changed my CV to a finance CV. I put loads of numbers in there, loads of action words, and then put that onto eFinancial Careers. And I got a missed call one day when I came out of a lecture, and it was Octopus. So I was like, I couldn't believe my luck. Called them back. They're like, are you available? I was like, of course I am. I wasn't at all. I still had the rest of my term to go. I had a holiday booked. So yeah, I cancelled everything and went to the interview. 2 weeks later, I was sat at a desk in Octopus after having done 6 interviews, It was rapid at that time. They were growing so quickly, paying for a holiday in India that I wasn't on, and then also suddenly under FCA restrictions on my trading. So I wanted to sell my shares in Ocado, and then instead of just being able to sell, I had to get approval. Then I wasn't on the system for approval, and by the time I finally got around to selling, I'd lost kind of equivalent of 6 months' salary. So I was basically working for free and paying for a holiday I couldn't be on, but it was worth it.
Risk required.
Yeah, exactly. Investment. Because the amount of stuff I learned from Octopus was incredible. I suddenly got open to this world of venture capital trusts and enterprise investment schemes and all these tax breaks and kind of just a world I hadn't explored before, and a structure to doing finance that Tesco didn't have at all in the departments I was in. For us, it was, what's it look like in 3 years? Whereas now we were looking at every cost and revenue for the next 25, 30 years and working it all back, and it was just, much more regimented way to invest. Learned a huge amount from them. And I remember my interview, because at the time the CEO interviewed everybody, and he was kind of, how do you ever make any money on listed stocks? I just couldn't understand it. It was then an education in how to make kind of outsized returns, because you're on the private, not even markets, private investments side of things, where there's way less competition. And that kind of brings you back to that risk point, is just because it's a higher return, it doesn't mean it's higher risk. It might just mean no one else is looking at it, so there's lower competition. And kind of using an example for that, because I get so frustrated with people saying high risk, high return, or high return means high risk. So if you have agricultural, growing nuts or something, and they have 10 people washing the nuts before they're packaged and sent off to the supermarket. But if they had a machine to do that, they could do double the output, half the number of staff, make 200% return on that investment, but they just don't have the cash to buy that machine in the first place. So you give them the cash to buy the machine and you split the profit with them. It's not risky.
It's a machine.
Yeah, unless that machine breaks, but there'll be warranties and so on. So it's pretty much guaranteed return, and nothing's guaranteed, but you know what I mean. And it's so much less risky than going into a equity stock or a bond that it might not lose a lot, but it could lose a couple of percent. Whereas this, chances are you're going to get 100% or something in your year, and so there are investments out there that are high return and low risk.
We'll get on more on investments in due course. I'm interested then, if it's going so well at Octopus, if it's teaching you so much, if you manage to pay for that holiday but take the job, if you kind of breeze through the 6 rounds of interviews, if you manage to woo the CEO, because at that point there was doing the interviews, what forced you or caused you or allowed you to leave and ultimately at the age of 32 go, I'm not going to work for the 9 to 5 for the big man anymore?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of factors that came into that decision, so I'll try and remember them all. But the trigger point was a bad boss. He'd only been my boss 3 months, and he wound me to distraction to the point where I just needed to get out. Looking back on it, I should have probably had a holiday. At Octopus you get unlimited holiday, so I kind of stopped taking as much. So when I signing out with HR, realised I'd not really been taking holiday, and actually maybe that's what I needed more. So I should have done that, but I didn't. So that was the trigger point. But then there was a kind of couple of other things there. So I was in a financial position where I could. I was even questioning that, whether I was, but I sat down with the CEO, because as you say, he was on my side, which was lovely, and worked through my financial position and my plans and so on, and he was like, go for it, you're fine, you're safe, you'll do all right. And that kind of gave me the confidence I needed. I think also it was that because my father died when he was 58, I was 21 at the time, so he'd been saving all his life for this retirement, this kind of golden age where he was going to retire to Dorset, work on the house, make that nice, and then he'd not got to do that. And so there was that part of me was like, I've got to enjoy my life now. I can't save for this retirement and then I'll probably need a new hip or something. I won't be able to go and enjoy that money. And I remember standing in the kitchen in the office block, and that kind of had floor to ceiling glass windows, looked out on another building opposite who also had floor to ceiling glass windows, and all the way up was just desks and desks of people all sat there working. And I was like, this is like battery farming for humans. I can't, this can't be my life. There's so much out there and we're only here once. So I think that realization, the means to do it, and then the burning ship of a bad boss all came together to take that leap of faith. And I thought, I'd go and travel the world for a little bit and so on. But then the pandemic hit. So while the pandemic hit, I was like, I might as well start politics, because that's what I was looking to go into longer term. And then by the time pandemic restrictions lifted, the politics was doing so well that I am kind of now bound to London and in Westminster.
And I guess also the pandemic allowed you the chance to spend time investing and utilising and using your money as well. There are two key questions I want to ask, and I know anybody listening to this is screaming at me to ask one of them. I'll get to that in a second. But you referenced your dad and obviously the impact his death had on you and your mindset. You also earlier referenced kind of fleetingly the fact that being gay has had an impact on you, not just kind of with regards to relationships, but also you and your take on life. And you mentioned protecting yourself.
Yeah, I guess it feels kind of like me against the world. And growing up, it very much did, because there was no kind of out gay people to look up to, and like the media portrayed a very singular version of what gay meant. So there weren't really, kind of people to, I don't know if idolize is the right word, but, mentor you and look up to and so on. Looking at that, I did a speech recently on this, the stats for gay people or LGBTQ total who are homeless at one point in their lives is huge. It's 18% of LGBTQ people at one point in their lives are homeless, and trans people it's 25%, which is insane. But then looking back on it, I was like, I didn't tell my parents I was gay until I had a secure place to live and I knew I could look after myself, and that's not uncommon amongst my friends. And then some of my friends who did tell their parents were thrown out of home, and made homeless. So it's surprisingly and quite scarily common, today when we think everything's getting better, quite how much it's not sorted yet.
The final question, which I know people are screaming at me asking, and it's important because I think it frames what comes next about your views on finance, etc., is they'll be like, Gareth Ed, you've talked about like 55 times return on your money, that you've talked about that 100,000 euros that you got for Truck Labs. You've talked about, taking £100,000 investment into a worker in Tesco in the UK and spending £6,000 on someone in India. They'll be saying, well, how much is Ed worth? This is people are nosy, Ed. They're nosy. But I think it's important, because you are about to, and this book, RiskRequired, is all about talking about how your success, ultimately, you want to kind of share that pathway, some of the things you've done, some of the risks you've taken, some of the alternative tracks you've taken. And ultimately, someone's going to want to know, well, what does it all mean? What was it all worth?
Yeah. Well, so I think it's all important to preface that with, I did, I've lost my father, I lost my grandparents, so I have inherited a small amount of money there. And I kind of put that into my education with the MBA and put some of that into investments like the £3,000 into trucking. So it's not that everybody can go and do this, but hopefully the book has a whole load of techniques and tricks you can use to not only make money off your money, but to borrow money and make money off that money. But we'll come on to that and the investing. So what am I worth? It's quite actually hard to work out, which is a weird thing to say. Most people can look at their bank account or their stocks and shares. But mine, because a lot of them are private companies, I have to either assess myself how much I think they're worth or look at what they last raised money for. But, I would estimate my worth to be somewhere kind of between 10 and 15 million pounds.
How does that feel?
It just feels scary saying.
You swallowed it. You swallowed before you answered that question.
Yeah, it's really hard to say it out loud, because it still doesn't quite feel real, and it probably won't feel real until some of those companies exit and it it's there in cash, because a lot of that is still paper money. It's not like I can go and buy a £10 million house tomorrow. It's quite a lot to get your head around, and it feels like I shouldn't have it. It feels wrong. It feels unfair. It feels like all these emotions.
Over the next couple of episodes, we're going to talk about debt. We're going to talk about investments and kind of then leveraging debt, leveraging money, kind of investing, making more, growing your portfolio, getting towards those millions, and also about politics, which we'll come to latterly. What do you hope over the next few episodes people will take away?
So first is to lose the fear around risk. That's the key thing.
Risk is required.
Risk is required. That debt is not bad. Debt can be really good. And debt, all the companies are using it, the banks are using it. It is the way to make money. And then hopefully a confidence that you can do this yourself. All the financial institutions, they're trying to tell you it's difficult so they can charge fees to do it. But when you boil it down, it's actually quite simple, and you do have the capacity these days to go and do it yourself. There's so many apps out there designed to make you self-sufficient and to support you in this journey. So the risk is required, debt is not bad, and you've got the ability to go and do this yourself.
Well, all those answers, all those points are in the next episode, and the episode after that, and the episode after that. So, dear listener, don't stop now. Press play.
Thanks for listening to my podcast. For everything the banks don't want you to know, you'll find the details in my book, Risk Required, out soon.